Anybody else getting tired of dealing with temptation? Sometimes it seems ferocious, other times extremely subtle. Little compromises, small steps away from the narrow road, steps imperceptible to those around us. Satan doesn't care if he can't knock you off today. Next year, or 5 years from now, we'll be just fine in his book. Today, we study how Jesus dealt with 3 big temptations.
Now, we've looked at in our series 9 different people that Jesus encountered. These are some of my friends here. And in each encounter, the people had a different surface need that Jesus met and a deeper need that he met also. If during this series you are still thinking that Jesus was a good moral man and a good example for us to follow, you have missed the point of this series. God came in human flesh. This is what God's love looks like to each of these individual people. Could be the theme of our series. It wasn't just one size fits all. He met some people who were skeptics and some people who were in anguish, some people who were religious and smug, some people who experienced failure or relational failure or shame. All these things we looked at. What does faith look like? Today, we're going to look at our last encounter, but it's not with a person. Jesus encounters Satan in our story, Matthew 4. Matthew 4 begins, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. Now, if you are a skeptic, or if you have friends that are skeptic, and you hear even the mention of the word devil, it's very easy for you to immediately sort of poo-poo the whole idea. Say, well, I don't believe in a creature with hooves and a tail and horns and a pitchfork and a red body. Goes around saying boo. Our culture will trivialize Satan, and then once it characterizes it in such a ridiculous way, then it says, I don't believe in that. That's not an argument. That's how third graders think. That's how junior hires sometimes talk. To make a straw man out of Satan as something ridiculous and stupid, I don't believe that either. Now, you may not believe in Satan. That's okay. If you have more issues in your life than you can possibly think of can be handled in a human way, there may be some reason to look into this. How do you explain or take into account so much evil? Now, what I'd like to do is the end of the message is look at what does the Bible say about evil. The first 2 parts, what I'd like to do is how has human beings tried to explain away evil in a historical sense, explain evil, and then how does secular man tend to explain evil today, and then against those 2 backdrops, then look at what does the Bible say. Now, I will have to say one thing. I'm going to try to do this in about 30 minutes, which is hopelessly too little time for this topic. So if there's something I leave out here or don't further explain, please offer me that grace. All right, historical explanation for evil. There have been 2 general, large picture items of how do you explain evil. One is dualism. Well, dualism historically said, and this has been the basis of Western thought for thousands of years, back to the Greeks probably the most, that there are 2 opposite and equal forces battling each other. Good against evil. And that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it's always going to be. And there really is never a victory on either side. They're just going to continue to fight with each other. And sometimes good may seem to win, and sometimes evil may seem to win. But there's never a hope of victory. Of good finally winning out and evil finally being ultimately defeated and finally defeated. That's dualism. It's been the basis of Western thought. Eastern thought is what's called monism. Hindu thought is based on this, and all the different things that are sort of offshoots of that. Monism says everything is God. The flower is God. The bush is God. The sun is God. You are God. The cancer is God. But it's not just that is in God, he's actually God. God is in the cancer, God is cancer. And if we could somehow see all of life from that divine point of view, we would see that evil is only an illusion. That's the basis of Eastern thought. That's one way of explaining evil, is it really doesn't exist. It's an illusion, if you could just see it from what it is. Now, if you're a monk in a remote monastery up in the Himalayas, away from real life, it may be easy to believe that. However, if you read the paper about the Fort Hood shootings and see soldiers on the ground, that's a harder thing to believe. Or, let's put this more on the ground, if you come home early from work and find your spouse in bed with your best friend, it's hard to believe that's an illusion. C.S. Lewis, in his book, Mere Christianity, talked about this monism, the basis of Eastern thought. He said, confronted with a cancer or a slum, the monist would say, if you could only see it from the divine point of view, you would realize this also is God. The Christian replies, and forgive me, I'm only quoting. The Christian replies, don't talk damn nonsense. Christianity thinks God made the world, that space and time, heat and cold, colors and tastes, animals and vegetables are things God made up out of his head as a man makes up a story. But he also thinks a great many things have gone wrong with the world that God made, and God insists very loudly on our putting them right again. Dualism and monism. Now, our secular culture, in trying to explain evil, there are three general threads that are all woven together. And it's not that our secular culture buys all three, but you hear these three, or offshoots of these three, in an explanation to try to explain evil. So the first is what I think of as secular one, that this is a material world only. Material world only means there is no God, there is no Satan, there are no angels, there are no devils. Everything is only what you see. And what that means for evil is that whatever evil exists, it is only in the basis, has its roots in humans. There's no outside force that's adding to evil. The second, secular number two, what that means is whatever evil we have, it's a human problem that has human solutions. That's what secular thought thinks. So you see something like the Pennsylvania stabber, and you think of things like what kind of education, what kind of home did he grow up in? Do we need to give people like this better treatment? A human problem. There must be some human solutions. Secular thought number three. We're basically good. This is a very strong driver in our culture, though it is not as strong over the last 35 years as it was the previous 100 years in Western thought. There's a reason why I don't want to believe that evil resides in the human heart. It's because I'd like to think of myself as basically good. And so would you. And so would you. And so would everybody out there. To admit that there might be evil residing in my heart opens Pandora's box, and my pride will not capitulate or admit that there's evil in my heart. These three strands all are sort of woven together in a way to try to explain evil. The problem is that these are hopelessly naive and don't explain evil hardly at all. Not the horror, not the depth, not the many nuances of evil. At the end of the 19th century, there was a large movement in Western thought, mostly in Europe, also in America, called progressivism. It's a philosophy. And progressivism was sort of built partly on Darwin, partly on secular thought, that man was progressively getting better. And by the end of the 19th century, there was this great shift in hope that man was going to have the greatest usher in the greatest era in history. World War I broke out. And when it did, the horror of World War I and all of its casualties began to shake this view of progressivism. That man was basically good, and we were going to usher in the best of all eras. Well, philosophers sort of rebounded after World War I and tried to think about that, well, we're on the cutting edge of education and scientific discovery and therapy for people, and trying to lift people out of poverty, and surely humanity is going to be moving forward. And then World War II hit. And World War II shook philosophers down to the bones, especially when they considered Germany. Because Germany, at the time, was the #1 educational country in the world and had the highest per capita of scientists, world-class scientists, of any country in the world at the time. And philosophers were trying to wrap their head around, how could a nation that smart and that advanced intellectually and scientifically go down a garden path of that kind of atrocity? Now, during the course of the 20th century, between communist China, communist Russia, communist Cambodia, several African nations, over 100 million people were murdered. Not talking about war. Murdered by their own government. Finally, about the mid-60s, the philosophy of progressivism began to take a jolt against reality. And over the last 35 years, you have a growing sense in our culture, especially in Western Europe, of what's called nihilism. Nothingness is the idea. That there's nothing outside of us, there's no God, there's no purpose beyond ourselves. As Oprah famously said, we have to create our own purpose. How do you explain evil? On the inside of your handout, let's look at the biblical explanation for evil. It starts out with human evil. Human evil. Psalm 14:1, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, they do abominable deeds, there is none who does good. Now, this is not just a verse for the atheist. If you read this verse and you think, I have an atheist friend. Oh, that really sucks to be him, according to this verse. This verse is saying something much more profound and something true about every one of us. I'd like to unpack 5 words here. First word is the word fool or foolish. This is not a derogatory term. This is not like being on the playground and saying, you fool, blowing somebody off. This is a technical term. And the technical term is related to, down here on the second line, it says, there is no God. Now, this is not saying the fool doesn't believe that there's God. This is something more. The fool, he says here, is somebody who in their heart says, I really don't need God. I can handle it today. Today's Sunday. I'm going to have a pleasant lunch this afternoon, and I'll probably take a nap. And tonight maybe we'll do something fun with the family, and then I'll go to work Monday. God, why would I need God? I can handle life just fine. Or so it seems. Now, it's not just that that is in our head. Because you might think, well, that's not how I think. But what he points to is the fool says in his heart, in this creature in here, where my head can think one thing and my heart can act very, very differently than what I want or what I want to admit to. In other words, I can be a Christian and believe that God exists and be on my way to heaven, but this afternoon, without thinking about it, go back into, I know how to handle my life. When I go to lunch, I'm going to be funny, I'm going to be witty, I'm going to be smart, and people think I'm a pretty good guy. Easy for me to do that. Easy for me to go that way. When I go that way, what the psalmist is saying, Seth, at this moment, you are a fool. You are trying to live your life, manage your life to get your needs met instead of relying on God. Next word he says is they are corrupt. Again, this is not a derogatory term. This is a technical term. Have any of you ever tried to open up a corrupt document on your computer or a corrupt file? That drives me nuts. You know, I don't know that much about this, as you're about to find out. I close the document, and I immediately double-click to try to open it again, as if somehow I didn't double-click correctly the first time. And I get the same error message, cannot open file or document, files corrupt. I close it, and I try it again. And I might try it 5 or 6 times, and I know now it's not going to open. Now, I tried at different times to do the old close down and reboot. Close down and reboot. And close down, and then try to open it. I still get that same corrupt document. It's going to remain corrupt because there's something broken in there. Now, I don't know what that is. Ask Ben after service. He can tell you. Or Lance, but he's on spring break. All I know is this. I am not going to get that document open unless I get some outside help to do something to the inside. I don't know if that's correct, but that's how I understand it. To the inside of that document or that file. Then, instead of it being corrupt, it's now fixed. Now, that's the picture he's using about human nature. There is something corrupt, broken inside. And no matter how many times I try to double-click or reboot, every time I do, there's something corrupt in me. Then they do abominable deeds. Now, he's not saying that everybody does abominable deeds. He's not saying everybody's going to be a high school stabber in Pennsylvania or Fort Hood shooter. But what he is saying, and making the connection to, is that if you allow folly to live in the heart and to say, I can make my life work, I don't need God, and allow my heart to continue to be corrupt, do not be surprised when you or anybody else does things you would consider abominable. That is the human explanation for evil. Did the kid's family have some dysfunction? Maybe. Done a better job of education? Maybe. With therapy of help? Maybe. But that's not enough. And then he finishes with, there is none who does good. Now, he's not using the word good here as you and I would use the word good deed. I wanted to repair the mirror on my wife's car yesterday, and I did it, the outside mirror. I fixed it the way I fix things like this. Crazy glue and electric tape. So far, it's still on, right? It was good so far? All right, we've made it about 20 hours with that so far. Okay, not talking about that kind of good. What he's using here is, there is none who does good as a summary of this is what goodness is supposed to look like, the opposite of that. Instead of foolishness, wisdom. Instead of there is no God, my heart says I need him. It's human evil. Now, you might look at that and you go, I don't recognize evil in me. That should be no surprise. And ultimately, it really doesn't matter if you recognize that or not. One thing's for sure, our human heart will put up a fight to recognize it and to admit it. But what the Bible affirms again and again and again on virtually every page of the Old Testament is every human problem that is not organic-based will find its roots, its deepest roots, right here. You had a conflict with your spouse last night. Your high schooler doesn't want to do what you want to do, and you had a barroom brawl over that. You're going to go to work tomorrow, and your boss is going to be the same stupid person that demands way more of you, and you're going to be so irritated. Now, but the evil is not just human evil. There's a supernatural evil as well. And the Bible exposes the reality of supernatural evil. And I'd like to do three things before we close today. Number one, who is our adversary? Paul writes, "Finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes, the wiles, the craftiness of the devil. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." This is one of those places where it describes that we're in a spiritual war. It uses the language of battle, spiritual battle. But I'd like to be even more specific, because this is not dualism where you have equal and opposite forces of good and evil. Satan is a fallen angel, not in existence from forever or eternity like God. He is a fallen angel. He was created good. He went corrupt. He went rogue. He went to evil. When we talk about Satan as a fallen angel, that's not just cute language. What we're saying is he was made good, and he himself became a parasite. He's not there for the benefit of you. He's there for the benefit of himself. Now, this imagery of battle goes a little bit different than just good fighting evil. What the Scriptures describe is that Satan himself somehow has taken over this world. Paul talks about the god of this world under our God, but the little g god of this world, as if he has invaded this land and taken us all prisoners, as Ephesians 2 says, to be captives to do his will. Although, for the most part, we don't see that. In other words, there's a battle going on, but instead of two big nations fighting each other, it's more like a civil war. And it's more like you and I, as Christians, live in occupied territory. If we were living, make an example, if we lived during World War II in France, and Nazi Germany invaded all of France, we lived in occupied territory. There was the enemy all around us, and the enemy was powerful. You had to be very careful. Now, there was an underground during World War II in France, and that underground would be sort of like you and I communicating with each other about what are we going to do about this battle that we're in. But we have to also be crafty. Jesus says, harmless, as wise as serpents, harmless as doves. You see the imagery that the Bible is depicting our world to be? Now, what I'd like to respectfully suggest is that if you think that this world is just a matter of human evil that only needs solutions of more education and being lifted out of poverty and greater therapy and better social systems, I'd like to respectfully suggest that it is you who are being much more intellectually naive about evil than the Bible. These two things together explain, as good as I know how to explain, the world we live in, including Fort Hood shootings and Pennsylvania stabbings and conflicts with the person you love. One other difference between, in this particular battle imagery, than dualism is that one day there will be a defeat. Ultimate victory will be God's. And we'll all be happy about that and celebrate that. 1 Peter 5:8, let's bring this down on a personal level. Peter writes, be sober, be watchful. In other words, be on the alert. Don't be naive. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Now, I got to admit to you, I'm a sucker for the Discovery Channel. And I love all those scenes where you're filming animals out there on the Serengeti. And I'm always sort of caught between two things. I'm hoping that the wildebeest herd will make it across the river, and all of them will make it there without the alligators getting them or the lions. And other days, I'm sitting there and I'm hoping those lions are finally going to get something to eat. Now, what does the lion do? Either one lion or several. You already know. You're way ahead of me. What they're looking for is to isolate one. Cut the one off from the herd. Wear it down over a period of time to where it's not running as fast, and then pounce. It's similar to barbecuing. I have, in my early days of barbecuing, and as you know, I am not a cook, but I spread the coals too thin. And the ones that are out on the edge, they're easy for them to sort of lose their heat and grow cold. Satan's attack with us as Christians is very similar. Isolate. But he's not going to isolate you from God today. But if he knows he can isolate you from God 5 years from now, that's fine. He's happy with that. But how would he get somebody like us to walk away from God 5 years from now when you can't imagine doing that now? Simple. Small little victories. Small little isolations. It's Sunday morning. I had such a hard week. I don't think I'm going to go to church today. I think I just want to eat pancakes and watch the news. You can do that. I like eating pancakes. I like watching the news. Satan's going, check. Victory today. Or you might be thinking, I know I should get up to go to church, but, you know, Seth, I don't know about Seth. There's something wrong with him. I think I may need to look for another church. I'm not going today. Check. Or you see Carol Brown when she's here playing the keyboard and she raises her hand as she's worshiping God, and you think, oh, she thinks she's so spiritual. Check. Just little by little. Doesn't take much. I know I should go to group, but it's Wednesday and I had such a long day today and I've got so much to do tomorrow. I just don't think I can go to life group tonight. Check. This is part of his purpose, to isolate and destroy. Let's go to the next one, Lisa. Purpose, to isolate and destroy. The next one is methods. Now let me give you 10 verbs. It's not an exhaustive list. But how does Satan deal with us? Here are 10 verbs. Afflict. Blind. Usually to ourselves and truth. Confuse. Create doubt. Entice. Lie. Accuse. If you've ever attributed the worst possible motives, just in it for himself, to someone, you should be able to breathe in the acrid aroma of Satan whispering in your ear. Seduce. Tempt. And I think one of his favorites, because it's so subtle. Insinuate with the people in your life. Now, his tactics are simple. Cunning, stealth, an angel of light, schemes, trickery. Matthew 4:1. Let's look at our story. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. What do we have so far from the Bible's point of view? Evil is both natural and supernatural. Evil is both inside of us and outside of us. Have you ever had a situation where somebody did something, they wronged you, and you knew you should be able to forgive them? It's not that big a deal. But somehow you just couldn't let that go. There was something in you that was just Velcroed to that. You just wanted to let it go, but you just couldn't. But it seems so stupid because it seems so small. What drives that? Is it just the human heart? Or is there something more? Or let's say that you had a misunderstanding, and it should have been a simple misunderstanding with a simple fix, and you're thinking, this thing has gotten so cockamamie and so gnarled up together into this ball of yarn and trying to pull this thing out, it's just making it worse. I just don't know what's going on. Should be simple, a simple misunderstanding. What drives that? Is it just our human dilemma and human not ability to do well with others? Or is there something else driving this? Number one, who is our adversary? Satan. Number two, where's the battle line? Normally, when I think about this, I think about Satan knocking people out of the battle. I think about outside and overt sins. Somebody jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. A murder-suicide thing. Fort Hood. And those things are certainly true. They're visible. But is that where the battle line is? You may think, well, I would never do something like that. Big, outward, visible sins like that. But what gets anybody to that point 5, 10 years from now? That's the battle line. Let's look how Satan tried to do this with Jesus. The tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. What in the world is he after here? If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Just before this event, temptation, was the baptism of Jesus, the beginning of his public ministry. He's 30 years old. He's standing in the Jordan River. And all of history has moved forward from God's point of view to this time when his Son would invade our world and take on human flesh and live as one of us. And now the redemptive ministry of Jesus begins. At that moment, the gospel writers tell us that the clouds part, the dove comes down like the Holy Spirit, and that God the Father can hardly constrain his glee. And he shouts down, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. It's a seminal moment. How important is that moment? Think about those words. What would you give to hear your Father say those words to you? This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. This is my daughter, in whom I am well pleased. I lived a long time chasing those words from my dad. I finally got to hear something like that. The effect of those words on my heart was like an anchor. Something settled in a good way. It was like I had a rudder. My life was more stable, solid. Now, why would Satan say, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread? What he's saying to Jesus is, I'm coming after the central thing out of which you're standing right now. That you are special to God. But I'm not going to come and just out and out say that. Who do you think you are? Because we would recognize that. All he wants to do at this point, he's got one little box. He's hoping to check that one little box of create doubt. Now, even though Jesus just heard, you are my Son in whom I am well pleased, the first temptation starts, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. In other words, are you so sure about that? And maybe what you need to do is make him prove it. Then maybe you can believe. Just create a little wedge of doubt, a little question. I love history. And one of the things I love is history about 200 years ago. In France and Spain, about 200 years ago, great armadas fought each other in the East Atlantic. The great warships, many masts, and many cannons on each side. And these ships would try to get astride of each other and try to bombard each other and try to knock out each other's cannons and sink the ships until some enterprising admiral said, it's really not this hard. The first objective is not to knock out all the other cannons, because that's going to take a long time and you're going to take a lot of hits. The first objective should be to knock out the rudder of that other ship. And once you knock out the rudder of that ship is helpless to maneuver. And you can pull your ship anywhere you want to and fire virtually at will without that ship's ability to fire in return. That's what Satan tried to do here with Jesus. That's what he tries to do with you and me. He comes after our rudder. My standing with God is that God delights in me. Even though I'm a screw-up, a spiritual screw-up, and a sinner, I am a forgiven sinner, and I stand in grace. And because of that anchor is the beginning of my joy and my significance and my security and my relationships and what I can bring and bless and love the people in my life. You assault that anchor, and I'm cast adrift. You take out that rudder in me, and I'm just a product of wherever the wind and waves take me. And I can tell you from personal experience, that's not good. Second temptation. The devil took him to the holy city, made him stand on the highest point of the temple. There they are in Jerusalem. And notice he goes after the same battle line. If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not sin. Strike your foot against the stone. Now, if you have any question about the subtlety of Satan, this verse should erase all doubt. Because Satan here assumes the goodness of God to Jesus. It's like you're talking to one of the Christian bros or sisters at Life Group. And then he quotes from Psalm 81, 2 verses, except he leaves out one phrase. In other words, you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, that's right. You got a good point here. Yeah, I could do that. The essence of this is, maybe you should prove that God is good. Prove it. Jump. Now, it might have made sense at some point to somebody. It does make sense when people commit suicide. It makes, at some level, however low, it makes sense to them. Something is moving them. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. When these temptations come to my mind, I'm not just sitting there going, wow, where did that thought come from? It really doesn't matter where it came from. Is it a wise thought or a foolish thought? Is it moving me in a good direction or a bad direction? If it's moving in a bad direction, my job is to take that thought captive and throw it where it needs to be thrown, into the pit of hell. If Satan wants to assault your finances and take you down financially, that's small potatoes. Wants to afflict your health, give somebody like Seth prostate cancer. That's small potatoes. But if he can take out my anchor, if he can take out my rudder, that's the big stuff. What is our best defense? In all three of Jesus' responses, there's one phrase that's common. And it's not what he quotes. It's what Matthew records Jesus quoted. It is written, and then he quotes from 3 passages from Deuteronomy. Man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. In other words, I'm not going just to live by what I can see or the material world or what I can get. What my emotional needs are at the moment or my physical needs are at the moment. There is something deeper and more important about my life. It's what God has to say. I'm building my life on truth. He quotes from Deuteronomy 8. It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. I am not going to test God about whether he's good or not. I am not open for that debate. If I open myself up to that debate, I might as well just go back to the back of the ship and cut off my rudder myself. I am fighting for that rudder. I am in a battle for that rudder and for my anchor. Verse 10. Away from me, Satan. It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. It's not just saying, well, when Sunday comes, you better show up to worship. That's not what he's saying. You put anything else first or central in your life, whatever it is, other than God, that's what we worship. Worth, ship. What we worth, what we value, ship. What he's saying here is, I'm not about to put anything in God's place other than him. Worship the Lord your God, serve him only. He quotes from Deuteronomy. You might think, well, those are some pretty obscure verses. Chapter 8, chapter 6, chapter 6. They are obscure verses if you're only hoping to find these kinds of things on Sunday morning from yours truly. This is why Bible reading on your own is so important, and Bible study. Some of you like to listen to the Word during the week. That's good. You're smart to do that. A life group is really important because you not only hear truth, but you hear other people are learning the truth and appropriating it. Our best defense is using God's Word to solidify the anchor that he has put in me. Satan is slick. And he will afflict you as much as he can without showing you his cards. Because then it's easy to see, oh, that's stupid. Why would I do that? He's quite content, day by day, to just find those little check marks and keep moving you that direction instead of that direction. Years ago, about 80 years ago, Newt Rockne was the coach of the Notre Dame football team. And Newt Rockne knew that their team, Notre Dame, was not that good compared to USC that year. USC was flying to South Bend for the game. Rockne was trying to figure out a way to somehow change the playing field. So he went through South Bend the week of the game and found 100 men in the town there that were at least 6'5" and weighed 300 pounds. He found 100 of them. And he told them what he wanted to do. On game day, the football team came out in their uniforms, and so did these 100 men in Notre Dame football uniforms. You can think, what would be the version of this in high school girls basketball? Bring in the Laker girls and put them on, the Laker team. He had the 100 men do all their stretching and stuff out near the 50-yard line, near the USC team, where they were doing their stretching and warming up. And what happened on so many of the USC football players was now doubt. And these guys are a lot bigger than we thought. They're a lot stronger. They could see themselves getting mashed by all of the four guys that are going to be on the defensive line who all weighed 300 pounds and were 6'5". Notre Dame won that game that day. They shouldn't have. They shouldn't have. All that was needed was to create doubt for the victory. Let's pray together. Father, would you alert us to Satan's schemes, as Peter tells us? Help us not to be surprised when evil happens. Of all people in the world, students of the Bible, should be least surprised when evil happens. Help us to hear the voice of Satan when he whispers in our ear. Help us to take every thought captive. Help us to fight for our anchor and our rudder.
We invite you to come worship with us every Sunday at 9:30 in Irvine, California. And you can visit our website at pacificchurch.com to learn more about upcoming sermon series and our church family.